What's up, YouTube? How we looking? Coach Max here, back with another video. Today, we're doing something different yet again. February so far seems to be the month of the We've done rebuilds, yeah, but we also did a reshuffle, and my Kingdom Hearts 3 stream had a redo. So what else could there be on the train? How about realignment? You see, there's been this persistent narrative in recent NBA history, maybe you've heard it, that the Eastern Conference is noticeably weaker than the Western Conference. Now, I personally think that's a load of baloney right now, what with the Raptors, Celtics, Sixers, and Bucks all being good or getting there recently, the Pacers being on the come-up, and the Wizards having been a regular in the playoff picture as well. But in past years, I don't think people can be blamed for thinking that the Eastern Conference was LeBron James and those other 14 lesser teams. The King does cast a huge shadow, both in terms of media presence and getting to the finals every year. This isn't a knock against him. If you're as good as LeBron is, and you put together the resume that he has, you kinda can't take anything away from that. But I felt it was a bit of a disservice to the other teams in the East who play good, sometimes great basketball, and the only questions for them were along the lines of, when in the playoffs will they meet LeBron, and how many games will the series go before LeBron ultimately wins? In a recent interview, LeBron James stated that he believed the East teams, or at least the ones at the top, are all gearing up for playoff pushes with the belief that the road is easier now that he's not there. To quote him specifically, "Everybody in the East thinks they can get to the finals because they ain't gotta go through me." I both agree and disagree with this statement. I agree because LeBron James is just that good, that if you have him on your team, then you have a shot at the championship. So not having him in your path does make things easier. However, I disagree because having a shot is not the same as taking one and making one. Any one of the teams I mentioned above, I think, have a better than even chance to at least compete with any of LeBron's Cleveland teams. Sure, the chance of actually winning a 7-game series is considerably lower, but it's not like it's impossible. Anyway, if you're a fan of the NBA, I probably didn't need to explain any of that. You're probably wondering, what's all this blankety blank about realignment? If you're actually wondering that, I'm glad you asked. We're going to answer a simple question. What would happen if we moved some teams from East to West and vice versa? Of course, it's not quite as simple as all that, because we're going to do this a few different ways. Before we get into things, we're going to set some ground rules. First off, as this is more of an experiment than a rebuild, we're not going to tinker with the teams. The rosters in front office will be just as 2K has them. Also, while we'll let the CPU make trades if they want to, we're going to turn injuries off. Again, experiment, so I want to make it as close to an all of the things being equal situation as possible. The CPU can run their team stupidly if they want, but I'm not going to let a team miss a possible postseason berth or a player miss the All-Star game because of a badly timed injury. Lastly, all rankings, as in which teams will be moved, will be based off of the 2017 and 2018 season standings. Alright, let's get started. Our first experiment will be swapping the lottery teams in the West with the top 7 teams in the East. So the Raptors, Celtics, 76ers, Cavaliers, Pacers, Heat, and Bucks will all now be in the Western Conference, and the Nuggets, Clippers, Lakers, Kings, Mavericks, Grizzlies, and Suns will be in the East. Now, this will make the West a complete powerhouse with most of the top 15 teams in the league being over there, but that's not what we're looking to see. If we run under the assumption that the East is the weaker conference, then we're not likely to see much change in the top of the West standings, and maybe we'll see Boston and or Toronto break through in the lower seeds. Meanwhile, over in the East, the playoff picture should have a good chunk of those lottery teams from the West, so maybe one of them will make a good run. I'm predicting that Golden State will still be at or near the top in the West, but not with as convincing of a record as they've been able to string together previously. In fact, I bet the West teams will all collectively lose a few more games than they have before, and will stay on top mostly because the East teams that moved over will also lose more games. The Eastern Conference will be pretty unpredictable. I'm looking forward to seeing who makes the All-Star game and breaks through over there. Let's run it. Couple quick notes before we officially get started here. Even though all the functions are automated, we do still have to have a user team, so that team is going to be the Warriors because they are my home team. Also, they're the least likely to make any mid-season trades, but I figure if I'm usering them, then it'll be a little bit less likely even on top of that. Also, we're going to sim to a few different points. Namely, we're going to go halfway through the season to see what the records are. We'll go slim to the All-Star Draft, as we tend to do on this channel, to see who makes it. And then we'll go to the end of the season to see how things go, obviously. That's pretty much all I'm going to note. As is usual on this channel, ready, break. So we start off taking an L almost immediately, but then we blow out the Jazz. We do get a win against the Raptors and against the Bucks. One of the interesting things about the Warriors in this particular experiment, they have 4 Eastern teams in their division. So the Pacific Division is 4 teams from the East and the Warriors. So my earlier prediction that they may take a few extra losses might be a little bit off base, but we'll see how it goes. They're currently about to get 10-4, so not bad, but not super convincing. Either way, that's not much that I really need to say. I will see you at the halfway point of the season. So halfway through the season, to the surprise of pretty much nobody, the Golden State Warriors are on top of the Western Conference with a 34-7 record. They are on pace to do better than they did last year. But a big surprise is the absolute bloodbath that is positions 2, 3, 4, and 5, with only a couple of games separating them. And look who's actually involved. The Rockets, the Thunder, the Bucks, and the 76ers. So the East teams are actually making a pretty good showing here in the West, and they're not the only ones. Over in 6th, the Toronto Raptors, followed by the New Orleans Pelicans of all teams, and the San Antonio Spurs rounding out the playoff picture. The Timberwolves are also doing good, hanging in there at 9. The Celtics are not doing so great, currently sitting 10th, followed by the Pacers. The Trailblazers just absolutely fell off. Hopefully they'll be able to put it back together. Then we have the Jazz, the Heat, and the Cavs. Over in the East, the Denver Nuggets are leading the conference, which is not all that surprising. They could actually do that over in the West. The Wizards and the Hornets have taken advantage of the weaker opposition to put themselves at 2 and 3. The Phoenix Suns are actually breaking out and are currently sitting 4th, followed by the Lakers, the Hawks, the Clippers, and the Nets rounding it out. So the playoff picture is 4 teams from the West and 4 from the East, which is not bad. Right behind them are the Pistons, followed by the Mavericks, the Magic, the Grizzlies, the Bulls, the Kings, and the Knicks bringing up dead last with, I believe, the worst record in the NBA. Yeah, the worst record by far. So one thing that we can definitely take away from this is that the Eastern Conference definitely seems to be weaker overall still, but not by all that much. The records do seem a bit lower on wins in general, and the Western Conference teams don't seem to be losing more. In fact, some of the Western Conference teams that are still there are actually winning more games right now, but we'll see how long that momentum continues. So this is what the All-Star voting is looking like at this point in the season. Over in the West, only Giannis, Kawhi, and Kyrie have managed to break through and get votes, but that is to be expected considering the West was always stacked to begin with, and then when you take the best of the East and throw them in there, it's just crazier. Over in the East, it doesn't seem to be that much of a shakeup. We basically only have LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, Kristaps Porzingis, and Luka Doncic kind of breaking through to get votes. I was honestly hoping for a lot bigger of a shakeup. I would have liked to see Devin Booker in there, for example. But one thing I do like to see is that Kemba Walker is currently slated to be a starter, and D'Angelo Russell is right behind him. So there are a few different names in there, which is good to see, but, you know, I was expecting kind of more craziness. Now, if we want to talk craziness, check this out. Nikola Jokic is currently the frontrunner for MVP, and take a look at that stat line. 22.5 points, 14.5 boards, just under 8 assists, just over 2 steals, and just under 2 blocks. That is insane and frightening, although not entirely surprising. He is leading his team to the best record in the East, so an MVP nod is well deserved, and I would not be surprised if he actually holds to form and takes it at the end of the season. So here are your All-Stars for this experiment. Nikola Jokic does manage to hang on to get a starting nod in his first ever All-Star berth, and also making it for the first time are Zach LaVine, Luka Doncic, Nikola Vucevic, and D'Angelo Russell. So this is a pretty good All-Star game. It's definitely one I would take a look at. But again, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more of a shakeup in the East. It's kind of bad that Devin Booker didn't make it, but I'm glad to see that Kemba is a starter here. That's a name that deserves a little bit more respect. Nikola Jokic manages to hold on and clinch the MVP, averaging 23 points, just over 15 boards, 8 assists, just under 2 steals, and just about a block and a half. Good to see, much deserved. We always knew the potential was there. Glad he was able to unleash it in the Eastern Conference. Luka Doncic is your Rookie of the Year, averaging his usual stat line of 15.5 points, just under 8 boards, 7.5 assists. Dennis Schroeder is your 6th Man of the Year, also averaging his usual stat line of 18 points, 2.5 boards, 5.5 assists. Giannis Antetokounmpo is your Defensive Player of the Year with just under 10 rebounds, just under a steal and a half, and just over a block and a half to go with 22 points and 6 assists. Jonas Valanciunas actually clinches Most Improved Player with 17.5 points and 12.5 boards. Now, I thought he was capable of this in Toronto. Like I said, he was one of my favorite players, but it's glad to see that the change of scenery worked out well for him. Steve Kerr is your Coach of the Year, leading the Warriors to a 63-19 record. So that's one Western Conference team that has actually improved on last year's record, despite the presence of the playoff teams in the East. Though how much of that is due to the opposition and how much of that is due to adding DeMarcus Cousins and having him for the whole year, well, who knows. Anyway, your All-NBA teams, or All-NBA first team is Russell Westbrook, John Wall, LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Nikola Jokic. Your All-NBA second team is Stephen Curry, James Harden, Kevin Durant, Paul George, and Anthony Davis. Your All-NBA third team, Kemba Walker, Damian Lillard, Luka Doncic, Blake Griffin, and Joel Embiid. Your All-Defensive first team, John Wall, Victor Oladipo, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, and Anthony Davis, followed by Russell Westbrook, Jimmy Butler, Robert Covington, Draymond Green, and Rudy Gobert. Your All-Rookie first team, Luka Doncic, DeAndre Ayton, Trae Young, Marvin Bagley III, and Jaren Jackson Jr., followed by Colin Sexton, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Wendell Carter Jr., Mo Bamba, and Michael Porter Jr. Alright, so the playoff picture over in the West is pretty interesting. We do have Toronto, Philly, and Boston breaking through, as does Indiana. So my initial prediction that there wasn't going to be that much of a change at the top is actually still mostly valid. It is still Golden State, OKC, and Houston. The Pacers do take the 4th seed. Oh, and we do have the Bucks, so I almost forgot about them. So actually, it has changed rather significantly, just not quite at the top. Meanwhile, over in the East, it does look pretty interesting. The Washington Wizards are the 1st seed, managing to overtake the Nuggets at some point. The Nuggets are actually going up against the 7th-seeded Lakers. The Hornets actually go into the 3rd seed, and the Nets and the Hawks all manage to break through in the high seeds, as do the Pistons. So the lack of opposition did do pretty good for some of the Eastern teams, but those Western Lottery teams are just too good to be kept down completely. Let's take a quick look at the season stats here. Taking a look at the Western Conference standings, it looks like the Warriors, Thunder, and Rockets are pretty comfortable in 1, 2, and 3. The Warriors and Thunder, as I've said, have improved. The Rockets kind of went on a bit of a decline, but that season that they had last year was just way too good. It's kind of hard to match that. The Pacers and the Bucks have also improved on their lower seeds now that they're in the middle of the Western Conference playoffs. The Raptors went from 1 in the East to 6 in the West, and their record kind of reflects that as well. 76ers and the Celtics also have the same dilemma, essentially, going from top seeds in the East to lower seeds in the West. Now, it looks like the Spurs and the Jazz might have been able to hang in there and take a few games. They could have easily ended up in the lower seeds like they would have before, but the Trailblazers, Timberwolves, and the Pelicans just couldn't really hang. So that pretty much says what we need to say about the East. It's definitely not as weak as you might think, but part of that is because the bottom of the West is just not strong, and they're not really able to unseat the Warriors, the Thunder, or the Rockets. Now, over in the East, the Wizards and the Hornets and the Hawks and the Nets and the Pistons, for that matter, all took advantage of weaker opposition to move up into the playoff picture, and that's pretty much one of the main reasons we can think about that. Now, the Wizards have always been contenders, and since in this version of reality John Wall doesn't get injured and miss half the season, that's probably what keeps them up in the running. The Nuggets made a good showing, but that's to be expected. They are very much on the come-up, and they have Nikola Jokic, your regular season MVP, so it's not surprising. And then you have the Lakers, who have LeBron. The probably big surprise out of that is Phoenix actually breaking into the playoff picture. Obviously, with the weaker opposition in the Eastern Conference, they also took advantage. The Clippers were just shy. I'd like to think that if they still had Tobias Harris and Marcin Gortat, they probably would have actually broken in there too. The Bulls did a little bit better than they have before, obviously with weaker opposition, and so on and so forth. So the Eastern Conference is actually not quite as surprising outside of a couple things here and there than I thought, but it's still a very interesting look here. Alright, so let's take a look at the playoffs and see how things pan out here, see if any of the teams that crossed over are actually able to advance. So in the first round, Phoenix gets swept by the Wizards. And Golden State beats Boston. The Bucks actually managed to advance, but then again, that's Eastern Conference versus Eastern Conference. And OKC beats the Sixers, and the Rockets beat the Raptors. So it is almost all Western Conference over on that side of things. Over on the East, the Hawks actually do break through, but again, that's Eastern Conference versus Eastern Conference. And the Lakers beat the Nuggets in 7 games, so LeBron still has a chance to make the finals, especially with the weaker opposition. Let's go ahead and go with the next round, see how that pans out there. And it looks like the Thunder are not going to sweep the Rockets. It's a gentleman's sweep, but it's going to be Golden State versus OKC in the conference finals, and it's going to be the Wizards versus the Lakers in the conference finals over in the East. So we may get another repeat of the Warriors versus LeBron. Let's see how this pans out here. And the Warriors are just dominating as usual. They actually will not sweep, but the Wizards sweep the Lakers. John Wall destroyed a LeBron team in convincing fashion. That's something you probably would not have seen while LeBron was still on the Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference. So we have a Wizards and Warriors matchup in the finals, 2 teams that have been very hot for their conferences. Let's see who actually comes out on top, though I'm pretty sure it's going to be the Warriors, and yep, the Warriors sweep the Wizards. Kevin Durant is your finals MVP, averaging 32.7 points to go with 5.5 rebounds and 5.5 assists. A pretty scary stat line for the Warriors, but again, this is to be expected. It is the Warriors, it is my hometown team, so I'm glad to see that they won, and glad to see that at least in some cases, the Eastern Conference is able to make a decent showing in the West, and the Western Conference lottery teams are able to make decent showings over in the East. But that's just one aspect of this experiment. We still have a bit of ground to cover. Let's move on to the next one. Next up, we'll try it with a straight swap of the playoff teams. This is going to test the strength of the depth of each conference. If the East is weaker, then the West teams that moved over should run away with the playoffs easy. But the same may not be said for the East teams, who might see one of the lottery teams like the Nuggets, Lakers, or Kings break through with weaker opposition. Let's go. So over in the East, the Warriors and the Rockets are 1 and 2, pretty much as I predicted. What I did not predict was the Brooklyn Nets breaking through to the 3 seed, followed by Portland and OKC, and the Charlotte Hornets actually breaking through to the 6 seed, followed by San Antonio and Minnesota. So that was actually pretty surprising to see that the Nets and the Hornets of all teams are actually breaking through into the playoff race against the staples of the West. And I believe part of that is because the Pelicans are doing absolutely terrible right now, and we can't even say that they are doing badly because Anthony Davis got injured, because, as I said, injuries are off, so really we don't know what the Pelicans' excuse is at this point. Meanwhile, in more predictable news, over in the West, the Boston Celtics are currently leading the conference, but the Clippers, the Lakers, and the Mavericks have all broken through for the 2, 4, and 6 seeds respectively. Now, the other East teams are doing pretty well. The playoff teams are representing the best teams in the NBA at the moment, but the races are definitely a lot closer. The Pacers are still poised to actually break in there. The Nuggets are definitely poised to break in there. The fact that Nikola Jokic is doing as well as he is, but the team is only 19 and 21 is still kind of bad. The Kings also have the potential to put something together potentially. Same with the Heat. The Cavaliers, the Suns, and the Grizzlies, not quite as much. Not much change in the All-Star voting here. Nikola Jokic is still projected to be a starter. We do have Ben Simmons, Victor Oladipo, and Jimmy Butler as potential All-Stars over in the Western Conference, which we didn't see last time. Over in the East, not really much has changed. It's pretty much just take the West and move it over, though we do have Nikola Vucevic potentially ending up as a reserve there, so that's something to pay attention to. Here are all your All-Stars, pretty much as predicted. Nikola Jokic makes it for the first time as a starter. Ben Simmons, Nikola Vucevic, and Luka Doncic are all making it for the first time as well, so pretty much what is to be expected. Sadly, no Devin Booker, which is kind of bad. No Kemba Walker, which is also even pretty sad. And really, these All-Star teams look pretty much what we might expect if we had everybody healthy at this point. So I stopped the simulation just after the trade deadline to see if there were any high-profile trades, and to my surprise, there actually were. The Trailblazers had traded for Tony Snell earlier in the season, and then sent him and CJ McCollum to the Nuggets for Paul Millsap and Juan Hernan Gomez. So this is one of the first times that I've seen a star player actually get traded mid-season. I'm used to seeing this happen during the draft, but it's rare that it actually happens mid-season. What can I say? The trade deadlines in 2K are not nearly as exciting as the trade deadlines we have in real life, but it's good to see that some teams are shaking things up here. Stephen Curry is your regular season MVP, while Nikola Jokic put up a good effort. It just wasn't a match for 28.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, 8 assists, while shooting 47% from 3. DeAndre Ayton is your Rookie of the Year, putting up 18 points and 13 boards for the Suns. Hopefully he was actually good enough to lead them to a couple of good wins, but I'm not holding my breath on that. Chris Middleton is 6th Man of the Year, putting up 16 points, 4 boards, 4 assists, a very nice, respectable performance. Actually a little bit surprising considering I thought he was starting, but maybe things have changed when I wasn't looking. Giannis Antetokounmpo is your Defensive Player of the Year with just under 11 boards, a steal and a half, and a block and a half to go with 20.5 points and 5.5 assists. Jordan Clarkson is Most Improved, most likely due to getting increased playing time, but he still puts up 19 points, 2.5 boards, and 3 assists with those minutes. Steve Kerr is once again Coach of the Year, leading the Warriors to a 60-22 record over in the Eastern Conference. Your All-NBA First Team is Stephen Curry, Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Nikola Jokic. Your All-NBA Second Team, James Harden, John Wall, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, and Anthony Davis. And your All-NBA Third Team, Kyrie Irving, Damian Lillard, Blake Griffin, Paul George, and Joel Embiid. Your All-Defensive First Team is John Wall, Victor Oladipo, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, and Anthony Davis, followed by Jimmy Butler, Russell Westbrook, Draymond Green, Paul George, and Rudy Gobert. Your All-Rookie First Team, DeAndre Ayton, Luka Doncic, Trae Young, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Marvin Bagley III, followed by Colin Sexton, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Wendell Carter Jr., Mo Bamba, and Kevin Knox. So the playoff pictures over in the West look pretty much almost like a carbon copy of what they looked like last year, with the exception of the Clippers over in the 4th seed, the Lakers in the 6th seed, and the Mavericks in the 7th seed. So we kind of predicted that some of those teams were going to break through, and they managed to do that and hold the form. Meanwhile, over in the East, it looks like pretty solid. The Nets and the Hornets break through to the 6th and 7th seeds. The big shocker is seeing San Antonio get all the way to the 3rd seed when they were pretty low at the halfway point, so it's good to see that they've actually turned things up, and the Jazz do actually put things together and actually make it to the 8th seed when they were just on the fringes before. So the East had a pretty good showing, but they couldn't really hang. Still nice to see Brooklyn and Charlotte over in there. Let's take a quick look at the standings just to see how they did. Over in the East, other than the drop-offs with the Rockets and the Pels and the come-up of the Nets and the Hornets, the records haven't actually changed all that much. The Warriors improved a little bit, the Spurs improved a little bit, the Thunder improved a very tiny bit. So not much change in the records. Pretty much it looks like the Nets and the Hornets just decided to ball out, and that's how they broke through. And again, the Pelicans kind of falling apart probably helped with that too. Over in the West, the picture is actually pretty simple. The Clippers, the Lakers, and the Mavericks all did much better. The Raptors and the Cavaliers and the Wizards all did considerably worse. So it pretty much stands to reason that if the East teams that had fallen off had not fallen off, the West lottery teams might not have actually found a way to break in there. Okay, maybe the Lakers might have because they have LeBron, but, that's more LeBron than the team. So I think this lends a little bit of additional credence to the fact that the conferences are actually, I wouldn't say well balanced, but definitely a lot closer to it than they have been before. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's see how the playoffs pan out here. I realized I've been saying pan out a lot. I need to come up with new words here. Anyway, over on the West side, the Warriors beat the Jazz in 5 games. Houston beats Charlotte in 5 games, ending that particular run. And the Spurs actually beat the Nets. So the Eastern Conference teams did have a good showing, but ultimately fell to the West. Over in the Western side of the bracket, the Clippers do beat the Pacers, so they actually advance. The Lakers fall to the Raptors. Actually, they get swept. which is kind of nice. It's probably a little bit of revenge on the part of the Raptors against LeBron, but, we'll see how long that lasts. So things are actually looking pretty good. That's in the current round. Didn't mean to actually send the whole playoffs back then. Pretty competitive series. The Rockets do advance. The Warriors actually fall to the Thunder in 7 games, so we're obviously going to see a little bit of a different matchup. And it's a matchup that could actually be interesting because it can be either the 76ers or the Los Angeles Clippers advancing, whereas it's the typical Houston Rockets, OKC Thunder matchup over there on the other side. So we'll see how it is. I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed for the Clippers to make it. I don't think they have the good odds to do it, but stranger things have happened in rebuilds that I've done. But stranger things are not going to be happening because it'll be the 76ers versus the Thunder in the NBA Finals. My money on this is definitely going to be on the Sixers. I think they have an overall better team, but you can't sleep on Russell Westbrook or Paul George. Let's see who actually takes it. It's actually very even, and the Thunder are your NBA champions in 6 games. Russell Westbrook is obviously your Finals MVP, averaging 21 points, 7.5 boards, and 6 assists. No, not quite a triple-double stat line, but hey, he's got the championship, so I doubt he's going to complain about that. So it was very interesting. The playoffs actually played out a bit differently than I would have expected. But for the most part, all the lead up to that, to the playoffs was, I wouldn't say it's exactly as I predicted, but it wasn't super surprising. I do think, having run through this experiment twice now, the conferences are a little bit more balanced than we thought. Let's run another one and see if we can really test this theory. Actually, on second thought, I didn't realize how long this was running while I was recording it, and I have been trying to make these a little shorter, so I'm going to break out the head coach executive veto power again. We're going to bring it in for now, and I'll put up the second half next week. Since I'm actually going to be out of town for basically the next 3 days, this will make the short work week a little bit less frenetic for me. Also, just as a reminder, since I will be out of town as I mentioned, there will be no Kingdom Hearts 3 streams this weekend, but barring any last minute changes, they'll be back next weekend. If you enjoyed this experimental realignment, let me know by hitting that like button or leaving a comment. If you just found me for the first time today, I do NBA 2K content every Friday, from experiments like this to general commentary, and I'm also streaming Kingdom Hearts 3 on the weekends, as I mentioned before, when I don't have other pressing plans. If either of those things are your jam, you should join the team by hitting that subscribe button, because I'd love to have you. That's all for now. Until next time, take care, y'all.